Hospital grounds and the 61st Chelsea Flower Show. Without doubt, the finest flower show in the world. It must be every exhibitor's ambition to come here and win the Royal Horticultural Society's coveted Gold Medal Award. And it's difficult to imagine that just 2 or 3 weeks ago this was no more than a playing field with football pitches and people walking the dog. And then this week, every visitor expects perfection. Perfection of the individual flower, of the groups of flower, of the quality of the pot plants, the way that they've been pinched and trimmed and trained, every tree, every shrub at its best. And when the visitor comes, they see but a tip of the iceberg. You need to go behind the scenes to get some little idea of all those preparations involved over months, if not years. And then when you've got it right, you've got to get them here and use all your artistic skills to exploit that quality. And all the time, the spectre on the horizon is the weather. We had those vicious frosts in December and January, and then I think the hottest weather I've ever experienced here for the middle of May. And if you think of peonies, timed to perfection, having to be loaded up at Sealand near Chester and then brought down on lorries for the M6 and that sun beating on the vehicles, and of course they just don't like the heat. And the petals begin to wilt. Speaking to Alan Roberts, he said that he just hopes they get a really good shower of rain tonight. That'll tighten up the canvas and the atmosphere will be cooler and those peonies will close in again and be perfect on Tuesday morning. But there's no satisfying exhibitors because when it comes to the astilbe, they usually love those lovely cool, moist sort of situations in the garden. But here we want a bit of warmth to get those plumes fully out and show the maximum amount of colour. But there are other plants which have been grown for a full 6 months and the fella thought time to the minute, but that heat was just too much for them. The Lilium testaceum, for example, lovely orange shade, and I can smell them. That warmth has really given us the fragrance, but they've gone over. They'll have to go back. And if you think of a lorry driver usually delivering perhaps the local nursery and flower shop once a year, he has to set out and really face the thick traffic and time his delivery to an hour or so. It's a far cry from the London traffic to the lanes and the nursery gardens of Kent. Mr. Dennis Magson from Betherston, he's grown lots of crops, but for the last few years has specialised in geraniums. But Dennis, what's special about these? Surely this is Mexicana. We've had it for, what, 7 or 8 years, and one of the most popular basket varieties of all, actually.
Well, yes, I suppose you have about 6 years, but it was discovered about 10 years ago, in actual fact, in Mexico. Hot, dry, just right for geraniums, of course. And the interesting thing is what actually happened. It appeared to occur spontaneously. Some genetic change took place. What caused it?
So was it a sport? I mean, we have it with chrysanthemums and carnations, all sorts of things, suddenly go berserk and sport a bit.
That's true, but as a genetic change has occurred, something has happened. Something's caused it. And we're interested to know what caused this.
So a virus, then?
Well, possibly. But modern techniques say no. But there are the much smaller particles. So it's probably something like that.
And now you're spreading this sort of characteristic into other varieties, then?
Yes, indeed, and very pretty they are too. But we're not doing it successfully.
What do you call successfully, though?
Well, our present rate of success is about 1 in 120, one transferred to the new variety. And we're doing it by grafting, the only means apparently open to us. We've tried several other ways, but it's the only one that actually works.
How did it happen in the wild, then, on that first one in Mexico,
well,
do you think?
We've got a lead now, because we know that the butylon, which is also South American, can only be transferred by a South American whitefly, not our whitefly.
So one specific insect possibly transmits this little tiny white.
It's often so, with other crops too.
And this is the sort of thing that you've been doing then, taking
Yes.
a variety. What's this established?
This is one of our ordinary ivy leaf varieties, and here we have Alpine Glow, Harlequin Alpine Glow. So the basic colours change slightly too.
And behind me...
Yes, here we have My Love from a red variety, a light red variety. And we've got about 6 varieties.
Well, you've got more over there.
Yes, well, there's Picotee there, and Pretty Girl, Mahogany Beyond.
You don't seem to have a really rich lavender.
Lavenders and purples we just have not been successful with.
Are you still grafting then?
Yes, it's the only means open to us at the moment. And here's Lynn actually doing a graft.
What's she dipped the knife in, first of all?
That's vitamin C, and it prevents bruising, quite successfully, actually. This is a slit stem graft, straight through the stem. And she'll now taper the little bit of Mexicana, which is the scion, if you like.
And you don't worry whether that grows or not. I mean, that just supplies whatever it is that does the colour breaking.
That's right. And in practice, we know it will stay alive for 5 or 6 weeks, and it will gradually peter away after that time.
Yeah, so you root that cutting, and with some sort of luck, you may have a mauve one with
absolutely
harlequin white flecking in.
That's it, and this will be Jojo if it's successful. Yeah.
And the first time that people can see these publicly will be at the Chelsea show then?
Yes, indeed. Yes, what a fortnight's time.
Aren't you concerned, though, about the high cost of producing traditional geraniums? I mean, you've got to carry them right through the winter and take cuttings.
Yes, well, there are inevitable costs, but we've got a development which may hopefully do something very much about that.
You're going to reduce the price of them?
I hope so.
Well, how do you do that?
Well, we have a chemical in the ethylene family, you know, that very versatile chemical.
Well, that's given off by ripe fruit, isn't it? I mean, that's what I sort of know ethylene as.
That's it, and it is used for many purposes. And if we spray the stock plants, the mother plants, with ethylene, with the derivative, that is, we can increase the productivity of the mother plants quite dramatically.
Well, then what do you mean by quite dramatically? I see that great big house with literally hundreds of stock plants. You'd normally take, what, I suppose, about 6 cuttings from a plant?
Oh, no, rather more than that, perhaps 30 in a season. But we can increase it by 5-fold. 5
You mean 150 cuttings instead of 30?
That's the point.
So exciting new varieties, and even the chance of the price coming down.
Well, I certainly hope so, yes, indeed. It should result in that very thing.
Thank you, Dennis. The harlequin ivy leaf geraniums have made it safely, and now it's up to Dennis, aided by his Geranium Society members, to arrange them artistically. And they've chosen hanging baskets. Everywhere else the stands really begin to take shape, but that same care with every flower and every plant working towards those master plans. Rough meadowland turf full of weeds. What are the members of the RHS going to say about that? Weeds at the Chelsea Flower Show. John Chambers, how have you got the nerve to do it? Surely it should be flowers here.
This is the finest collection of wildflowers that you will ever see at Chelsea, such as cowslips, oxeye daisy, lady's smock. These are ones which I think have a very rightful place in the garden. And I really do advocate that we have at least 300 species in our range that are suitable for the garden, for various places in the garden.
But if I think of a thing like harebell, you know, it has all this lovely, soft, wispy sort of growth. I mean, you expect to see it on heathland. That's no garden plant, is it?
Well, harebell, like many others, when they're grown free from competition, they often form very different habits, much more horticulturally attractive. Ones like harebell form this lovely tuft, pyramid of a tuft, that comes like that just before it flowers. But ones like cowslip grow far larger, flower much more freely when they're grown free of competition from other plants.
So they change their whole character then? I mean,
very often, many of them do, yes.
And
or you're just more aware of their garden merits.
How did you get into it, first of all, the selling of wildflowers in packets?
We first sold 2 wildflower mixtures in seed packets. There was an immediate response from the public who wanted the more attractive items such as harebell and cowslip from the mixtures. So the following year, we produced a collection of 22 wildflowers in gardener's seed packets, very much ones that we thought were particularly suitable for most gardens.
This rather nice buff sort of packet is from your original illustration?
That's right, yes. We illustrated these and another 22, and we produced the first gardener's collection of wildflowers.
And is it only the packet seed trade that you're interested in then? I mean,
this is the collection we have for gardeners, but we are very keen to get local authorities and parks to put down areas of suitable grass and wildflowers so that we can start to put back some of the wildflowers that we seem to have smothered out with a lot of the grass seed mixtures that we've been using on motorway embankments and in country parks for so many years.
Oh, so when I see these, you know, great strips along the motorway with cowslips popping up, is it the human hand that's been involved?
It is very possible it is the human hand. More and more local authorities are beginning to be aware that not only can they introduce wildflowers by using mixtures such as mine, but also by using the right variety, the right species of grasses, that they can encourage the wildflowers that are there in the soil to grow and not to put down the sort of grasses that will completely overpower them.
Yeah. Well, to bring it, you know, right back into our own gardens, if I buy a packet of cowslip seed here, what should I be doing with it in the next few weeks?
Well, ideally, cowslip is sown in the autumn so that it can overwinter and just be subject to the fluctuating temperatures. But if you buy a packet now, then pre-chilling would be an advantage. You needn't pre-chill, but if you were to put it into damp sand in a plastic bag, leave it in the cool compartment of a refrigerator for 3 or 4 weeks, and then sow it in the normal way, you will probably get better results than if you were just to sow it direct.
Most of us have quite small plots, and the design here is for a London walled garden. Well, it's the sort of thing that you could build in any city. But if you have a small garden, then it's lots of walls and fences, and you need plants to cover them up, and there are plenty of climbing plants here. One of the most popular is Clematis, and Jim Fisk up in Suffolk, he's been growing them all his working life. He corresponds to people all over the world about that particular group of plants, and this year he's got yet another new variety.
This one comes from Poland, and it was raised by Brother Stefan Franczak, who lives in Warsaw. He is a Jesuit monk, and he has a very large garden there, and he looks after the garden for the Jesuits. And he sent that to me about 2 years ago, and asked me if I would like to raise it in this country.
Amazing, isn't it, how those enthusiasm for plants sort of crosses barriers.
Wonderful. And of course he named it after the Pope, because it was just at that time that the Pope was elected that this plant was raised from seed. And he thought that it would be rather nice to have it in this country. And especially as the Pope is coming in May, we thought it would be rather nice to put it on at Chelsea.
And so you got just one plant?
No, we've got two. That one we have used for cuttings and grafts, and that's why we have flowers on it this time of the year. And this one we're saving for Chelsea. And it has 4 buds on, and we're hoping that it will come in flower in time for Chelsea.
Can you show us, though, how you multiply them up from one plant for the hundreds that you're going to have to sell?
Well, to get plants quickly, we graft them. 90% of the clematis that are grown nowadays are raised from cuttings.
Just show us that grafting. I love to see these inside men working, you know. You've been doing it for years, I presume.
About 50 years. Well, this is the old man's beard. This is the stock. And it's raised from seed. It's a 2-year-old root, and so you've got a good start to the plant.
Yeah.
And you take a piece of wood off the plant,
Yeah.
you cut it into sections,
Yeah.
and then we cut the top off the old man's beard.
Yes, the
We
stalk.
cut it well down into the root so that no suckers will come up.
Yeah.
And then we take a straight cut along the side of the bark.
Well, it's almost a slither, isn't it? that you
Just a
cut off?
sliver,
Yeah.
yes. And then, with the named variety itself, you cut right down the middle.
Yeah. That's a
So
slither
you've
too,
got
really.
two.
Yeah.
You've got 2, you see, one each side. And then you marry the 2 together so that you get the bark joining, because
Yeah.
that's where the union takes place. And then with a very thin piece of moist raffia, you bind it
there.
gently but firmly.
No plastic or rubber? I mean, aren't you getting updated?
No, with raffia, you see, it rots after it's been in the frame for a few weeks. And by the time the union has been accomplished, you see, the raffia has disappeared.
Nice half inch on the bottom.
And there you have
And then potted like this. I mean, I've got another one here.
Yes, that one has been potted, you see.
But how do you get the root? I mean, you've got a lot of
Well,
root.
it is a little bit of a job. What you have to do is just twiddle the roots round and fill it with soil, put it down firmly, and there you see you have,
The potted plant.
yes.
But what about timing? Will you really have those buds in flower in 7 weeks' time?
Oh, yes, it'll be in flower easily. There's 4 buds there, and we hope that by the middle of May it'll be in full flower.
But what happens if the
Same
weather's
as this
hot
one.
then and it goes over?
Well, we have an awful time here the fortnight before May. If it's cold, you have to bring them all in, you see, and if it's hot, you take them all out. And for the fortnight before Chelsea, we're taking the plants in and out all the time. It's a nightmare. But we hope that by Chelsea, this one will be in full flower. 4 nice flowers. Be rather nice if the Pope was to come and see it, wouldn't it?
Yes. Brother Stefan has made the journey from Poland to see his new seedling, and thankfully Just one of those 4 buds has opened, and the visitors will see John Paul II in full flower. Outside the marquee, the transformation continues. Grass banks are converted to gardens in just over a week. Great holes gouged out and the soil lost, stones lowered in, ponds made, electricity, pumps, and great trees planted as if they've been there forever. And this year there's over 20 gardens being constructed. Another family that's been coming to every Chelsea since 1948 is the Bloms from Hertfordshire. Walter won his first gold medal in 1949, and the good work is being continued by his son Ronald. I think you've won a gold medal ever since 1949, is that right?
And hopefully again this year.
Well, before you rush on to this year's gold medals, how easy is it? I mean, that frost in December and January, is that a problem with tulips? Are they hardy?
It was a problem with the tulips as far as planting is concerned. We simply couldn't get them in. We plant from November onwards till the end of December, and by the beginning of December we were caught out by the frost, and there we were.
So you have the ground frozen and the bulbs, and you can't get them in.
Exactly.
Don't let me stop you. You can, keep on that good work. Never a moment wasted.
Wait.
Yeah. But how did you get them in then? I mean, I can see you sitting there with your Christmas dinner, just wondering how you're going to get the bulbs in.
Well, immediately after Christmas, we simply had to hack the ground open with a pick hoe, got the tulips in, covered them up, and then, of course, we got a second spell of cold weather. But luckily, we had a lot of snow, covered them up nicely, so we had no problems.
Goodness gracious. I mean, that sort of pickaxe story, all the good gardening books are thrown aside because they would say we should never plant in frozen soil.
It's absolutely true. There's no other thing we could do. We had to plant because we must plant before the middle of January, otherwise the quality of the flowers would have been affected.
But what about the weather now? I mean, it's been very warm and you seem to be able to get the tulips really up nice and stiff and straight in the vase. How do you achieve that?
Well, as soon as we cut the tulips, we wrap them up in paper, put them in water, let them drink, and as soon as they're full of water, we can arrange.
Let's go right the way through, because if I take the one away for a minute and show this vase, actually when I sort of look in there, that water's sort of quite milky.
Well, that's just some gristle, which we use to keep the water nice and sweet.
Yeah, that sort of is a cut flower lasting material. And then you just push it in anyhow.
Just push it in.
Yeah.
The soft end down so that the stems of the tulips slide easily alongside them.
Then you've got your tulips there wrapped to keep them stiff.
That's right.
And then
Cut the stem again.
Where? I mean,
just above the leaf joints.
Yeah.
Because this will ensure that the tulips drink plenty of water.
Well, sometimes when I arrange tulips, even though when I've given them a drink, they sort of flop. The necks go all over in sort of S shape.
Well, you mustn't touch the tulips at the top of the stem. Always hold your flower at the base.
I see.
That
Yeah.
will keep
And then
the
they just go
stem nice and
anywhere.
stiff.
They just go anywhere in there.
And then they'll go anywhere in there. They'll drink water again. They'll stiffen up, and by tomorrow they're perfectly upright.
This is a lovely colour. I mean, what's the choice in tulips? Is this a particular popular one? What is this?
This is Golden Artist. It's one of the so-called Viridiflora tulips, the green tulips.
Yes, because there's several artists, aren't there?
There is indeed. There is the ordinary artist and also Hollywood, which is the red artist.
Yeah.
Very popular with the flower arrangers.
Well, are they an important part of your business now?
Oh, they are indeed. They are indeed. Always have been. But tulips in general, I would say, are mainly used for planting out in the borders in the garden.
The main trade is just the ordinary gardener wanting what,
The main
20 or
trade is
30?
the ordinary gardener wants 20, 30, 40 tulips out in the border, which can give them flowers, say, from the end of March up to early May.
Oh, so he's buying all the different kinds, the
Oh,
little
yes.
short early ones and the tall late
yes.
ones. And you have all of those here?
Yeah, we have all of those here, except the very early tulips, which of course we can't keep.
I see. Oh, well, keep up with that good work and we'll be watching for that gold medal.
We will indeed.
Remember, I told you it was just a playing field, and right in the middle, of course, is that great monument. And the man who has to build a show around that is Mr. John Mattock. John, it's amazing that they actually get the marquee over that monument, but you must have quite a task to build around it.
Well, it always is a problem. Although it's considered a prime site, it always possesses tremendous difficulties because many people don't appreciate that the monument itself is not square with the marquee and it isn't square with the exhibit. And so you have two problems, one are geometrical and the other a practical one.
But, I mean, you did it, what, 7 years or so ago, and you used lots of water, didn't you, and fountains and things.
That's
I
right.
mean, this is quite
Yes.
different. What's the idea behind these sort of black arms that are sticking up?
Well, the idea was to try and get some sort of geometrical design that would carry the eye away from the monument. Many exhibitors, they try and cover the monument with shrubs and this sort of thing, and it looks patently obvious that it has been covered in rather perfunctory sort of way.
Yes, and it's difficult at this stage because the roses haven't come in. I mean, they're always the last to arrive,
Yes,
aren't they?
yes. Well, what we did with this particular site was we actually built a monument on the nursery in the car park and made a rough design of how we were going to construct this.
So you've already
outside.
had a bit of a go at it.
We've put this stand up about 4 times already.
Goodness. But you're chairman, aren't you, of shows committee? Might
Yes.
some people will sort of think, goodness, you know, he has the plum site the second time.
Well, no, that's quite erroneous. We took this on to very, very short notice because another exhibitor was going to exhibit here and then failed to find the cash, quite frankly.
Do you mean that somebody dropped out at the sort of last-ish minute with a great big site like this?
Oh,
It
yes.
seems unbelievable,
Yes.
doesn't it, with all
Yes,
the sort of
that's quite
planning that
true.
goes on.
Mm.
But if I was a visitor, you know, to Chelsea
Yes.
in the coming few days, and I thought, oh, goodness, I'd like to bring an exhibit of whatever
Yes.
it was, geraniums or fuchsias, how would you set about it?
Well, I think, first of all, you've got to show that you're horticulturally accomplished, both as a grower and as an exhibitor. And the Royal Horticultural Society do run a series of shows during, right throughout the year. And so if you ever intend to show at Chelsea, then the first thing to do is to start exhibiting at what we call the fortnightly shows. There are actually only 12 of them, that's neither here nor there.
Can I put you on the spot a bit with roses? I mean, you keep seeming to me to change the names. We have to call these, I think, now a single flower and a cluster flower. Is that right? I've hardly got used to polyantha.
No. Well, you see, they were one time called hybrid tea bush roses and floribunda bush roses, but they didn't really signify anything to the ordinary gardener. And the idea of calling a variety like this, iceberg, a cluster rose, it means far more to the ordinary gardener.
So you hope to make it easier for us?
Oh, much, much easier, yes.
Well, keep doing that.
Yes, good.
Lovely smell of pine and spruce, and much activity too, with lots of gardens being constructed on the bank, and you can hear that throb of London traffic just a few feet behind me. And here we're going to see the biggest collection of conifers ever staged at the Chelsea Flower Show. But earlier this year we went to Bressingham near Diss in Norfolk and met Adrian Bloom. For the past 17 years he's been following a burning interest in all kinds of slow and dwarf growing conifers, both deciduous and the evergreen kinds. Adrian, when you mention conifers, most people think, I think of cupressus, rather funereal sort of hedgy things. Is that how you see them?
Not at all, Peter. In fact, to the contrary, because there is such a wide, tremendous range of conifers now available. I mean, you just need to look behind us here to see the colour and form and shape that there is in the conifers.
And how many have you got here?
Well, in this particular area here, which is a mother stock bed for the nursery, we have about 500 varieties, but in my own garden we have near 1,000.
1,000 really different kinds. Do we need that many?
Well, I don't think we do need that many, but of course ourselves being specialists and us always looking for new varieties, then I think we have to be the people who have the areas to trial the plants, and then we introduce the best selection from those.
What are the uses for all these different kinds of conifers?
Well, I think the first thing about conifers is that they are evergreen or evergold or whatever the case may be. So they give you colour the year round, so they add a certain permanency to the garden. But among the different types of conifers, there are conifers for every possible use. For ground cover, over a manhole cover for the more higher spreading types, architectural plants which give you height, conifers for heather gardens, conifers for rock gardens, the real miniature dwarf types, or even conifers just on their own. You know, I could go on a little bit longer.
But where do they come from then? Do you raise them like new varieties of roses from seed?
Well,
are you a seed raising man?
No, we don't do that because mainly the dwarfus types, which we think are the ideal for most people's gardens, the dwarfer types don't come from seed. They have to be introduced or found by other means. And occasionally it's seed, but mostly it's from sports.
Oh, no, just a minute. That's a freak. I mean, a branch suddenly goes a bit berserk and changes colour or
That's
nature.
right, yes. For instance, on a conifer you may get a variegated growth on something that's normally blue or green, and it's by looking for those and starting to propagate from those that you then begin to build up a new variety.
But is it very easy to root them then? Because surely those, I mean, they're almost unhealthy little pieces, aren't they? Some of them must be difficult to root.
Well, some of them are, certainly, and that goes for many other conifers, but sometimes the better looking ones are slow to root. Anything that you root takes maybe 4 weeks to 6 months to root, and then those forms that you can't get roots on at all, then you have to graft those.
And that's a very skilled operation.
It's a very skilled operation indeed, where you have to take the sign or the part of the plant that you want and you put it onto a stock, a mother plant, and you make one plant from those. But the percentage take that you get is even worse than the cutting take that you would get.
But once you have these things sort of weaned and with their own roots or some form of rooting, then they just plug into the factory production line and you turn them out by the what, the million?
Yes, I mean, among the varieties that we have, and we create each year maybe 1 million new plants that go through the system, you see, at different sizes. We pot them into a small liner and then we take them on into a bigger pot and so on. Larger sizes in containers mostly, which we can then sell to, say, garden centres and so on.
And so 1 million a year is produced. Aren't you changing the face of British gardens?
Well, I think in the past 10 years one might have seen a few more conifers in British gardens than there were before, but as far as changing the face, I think we're a long way off that yet. And certainly I'm not too worried about that particular point at the present time, because as I go around the country I have a look in people's gardens, and of course there are a lot of gardens that don't have any conifers in at all, so I think there's a long way to go yet.
Well, it's certainly not all conifers here in your own garden. You seem to have a pretty happy mix of pretty well everything.
Yes, well, though we've got a lot of conifers here, I'm obviously trying to use them in different situations, and they're perfect with heathers, shrubs, a whole variety of things, which, you know, the right conifer for the right position.
Where do they come from? I mean, we've spoken about sports happening. I suppose it's pretty well anywhere in the world. Where do you get them
Well,
from?
it is, you know. I mean, most of them actually we have found in Europe, where of course there's so many countries, but lately I've been having to go a little further afield to Japan, New Zealand, British Columbia, Canada. We've just had a shipment in fact, 2 or 3 weeks ago, and United States. Of course, a new variety, if we get a new variety in, it may take 10 years before we can put it on the market. So it's a long-term thing we're really looking at.
And what about the exhibit? I mean, have you had a bit of a trial run at it before you load the lorries and set off for the bank?
Well, we do set it up a little bit. I mean, not a replica as such, but we do have to have an idea of where all the plants are going to go, because obviously it's like a jigsaw puzzle in the end. If you go down there with a whole lot, you may find that at the end you've got too many left or got a gap, you know.
Yeah. And then what happens next year? I mean, is it going to be heathers?
Well, let's get this year over first, Peter.
Well, the work's complete. The nurserymen have done their stuff. Everybody's got the plants here in good order, and those artistic arrangers too have pretty well finished everything. But the judges, they have their work to do. Walking the tent, and then various committees working well into the night, making the decision on just who does find one of the Royal Horticultural Society's gold medal award cards on their stand tomorrow morning. But if you're coming to the show, don't just look at the spectacle. Go in for the detail. Look at those lovely flowers and the way the simple columbine is having its spurs lengthened and the colours improved. And also the plant breeders are introducing smaller, more flowerful, shorter, wind-resistant plants. And it's not just the hand of the plant breeder either, because somebody walking through the heath in Salisbury saw a little variegated sedge. And that's been propagated, and there's just one plant here. And it's going to be called Tinny's Princess. And even more delicate than the orchids. This is a hybrid between Laelia and Cattleya. And Ken Owen was telling me that when you lift one of those plants with a flower just open, like a newborn baby, they're very temperamental. And that change in atmosphere from the greenhouse to the tent, they sulk and wilt. But give them 24 hours, he says, and that'll be up and in full flower and perfect for the show. Well, if you can't make a visit, and it's open to members on Tuesday and for the rest of us from Wednesday to Friday, well then perhaps you'll join us on Wednesday evening, BBC 2 at 8:20. Good night.